So, after learning about Samudragupta, then let us start learning about his son Chandragupta II Vikramaditya. So, who is this Chandragupta II Vikramaditya? So, as per the inscriptions and other details, we came to understand that Chandragupta II Vikramaditya was the son of Samudragupta. So that means Chandragupta II succeeded his father Samudragupta, and he inherited the military genius of his father and extended the Gupta Empire by conquest of his own. That means, like his father, he also extended Gupta Empire. So he followed the policy of extending the empire. So which was earlier even followed by his father, right? Like Samudragupta, his son Chandragupta too also extended the empire through various ways and means. For example, if you take his annexations and conquest, he annexed the territories of Shakas of Malwa, Gujarat, and Saurashtra. So, if you look into your textbook here, so these places you can see the map. So, first he conquered the Shakas of Saurashtra, Gujarat, and Malwa. Later on, because of his conquest of these three places and defeating the Shakas, he was called Shakari or the conqueror of Shakas. Okay, because of his conquest and victories over the Shakas of Malwa, Gujarat, and Saurashtra, he was called as conqueror of Shakas or Shakari. And according to the noted historian Dr. Vincent Smith, annexation of Saurashtra and Malwa not only added to the empire provinces of exceptional wealth and fertility, but opened up access to the ports of western coast. So here what you need to understand is he occupied all these places. Now among these three Shaka places, you take Malwa as well as Saurashtra. So these are present to the western side of India. So they represent the western coast. So through to Arabian Sea, these two places were present, or these two kingdoms were present. Because of annexation or because of occupying these two areas, they not only gave lot of wealth to Gupta kings or Gupta emperors, but also they gave access to the ports of western coast. That means as these places are present towards the western coastal area, especially to the Arabian Sea, it actually gave Gupta Empire accessibility to western coast, so that the ports in Malwa and Saurashtra came into use for Guptas to have trade with Europe. Through this western coast of Malwa and Saurashtra, these Guptas they used to do trade with the Europe. So from this western coast they reach Egypt in Africa, and from there they used to reach European countries or kingdoms, and they carried on seaborne commerce or trade. So on a sea ways they used to carry trade, and it is because of the conquest of the two Chaka kingdoms, Malwa and Saurashtra, as these are present towards the western coast, especially to Arabian Sea. The ports in these areas gave accessibility for the Guptas to have contacts, foreign trade contacts with Europeans through the Egypt. So it was during the rule of Chandragupta II. So it was during the rule of Chandragupta II that the Chinese pilgrim Fahin he visited India. So it was during this man Chandragupta II, who was the son of Samudragupta, the famous Chinese pilgrim Fahin visited India. And when he visited India, he documented whatever information he has seen throughout the kingdom. But he has never mentioned Chandragupta II. So, in his name, this name was never mentioned in his accounts, but there was just a mention that there was a Gupta ruler, and he gives a lot of interesting information on the life of people and general condition of the kingdom. So Fahin was never focusing on praisal of the king or something like that. he was mostly focusing on letting people know interesting information on the life of the people, how people used to live in Gupta's empire, and what was the general condition of the kingdom. So, on such aspects, he was he documented many things. And like Samudragupta, he issued a wide variety of gold coins. So, Samudragupta and Chandragupta II both had the privilege of issuing many gold coins. So, you can see the gold coins in this picture here. The differences in design between the coins of the two rulers are: Chandragupta II is represented as slaying a lion on some coins with the legend Simha Vikrama. That means, see, Chandragupta's coins, and if you take Samudragupta's coins, there is a slight difference in it. So, what is that difference? The difference is Chandragupta II's coins have a picture on that killing a lion. So he was also referred as Simha Vikrama. Whereas if you take Samudragupta's coins, on the coin there is a picture representing Samudragupta killing a tiger. Okay, here Chandragupta II killing a lion and Samudragupta killing a tiger. So these imprints were there on the coins. That was the difference between Samudragupta's and Chandragupta II's coins. So, also on many of his coins, Chandragupta II has the title Vikramaditya. So, on one of the coins, he has a imprint of killing a lion. On the other hand, in some of his coins, he was also given the title Vikramaditya. So, the person with more victories and all. And his court is said to have been adorned by 9 gems. So, they were also called 9 gems. So there are some great scholars and poets in the court of Chandragupta II, and they were referred by historians as 9 gems, including there were some famous among them known as Kalidasa, Varahamihira, and Amarasimha. So these are the these are the three people who are very great in historically, if you compare with other kings. So Kalidasa, who was a great poet, and Varahamihira and Amarasimha, among the 9 gems in the court of Chandragupta II, these three were very famous. And after Chandragupta II, he was succeeded by Kumaragupta. So his son was Kumaragupta. And it was during Kumaragupta's rule that Hunas, a barbarian tribe of Central Asia, invaded India for the first time. So so it was during Kumaragupta's time, a Central Asian barbarian tribe. That means these are very cruel people, very warrior tribes that attacked India. So such Central Asian barbarian tribe called Hunas, they have attacked Gupta Empire during the rule of Kumaragupta. So that was their first attack. And at the time of the next attack, that means second time also, these Hunas have attacked India. And by the time when they attacked the second time, the Gupta emperor was Skandagupta. So after during Kumaragupta, one time they have attacked, and again during second time, during the time of Skandagupta, the other Gupta emperor, they have attacked. But this time Skandagupta gave the Hunas a crushing defeat, and they did not dare attack India in next 50 years. That means Skandagupta has fought or he took measures in such a way that he defeated the Hunas in a very, in a very great manner, and so that they were afraid to attack India again in coming 50 years. So such was the fear that Skandagupta created in Hunas tribe. So, coming to the most important part, Gupta administration. So, Gupta administration saw the gradual disappearance of the republican form of government. So, that is slowly the republican form of government. That means earlier the tribals. So, what they used to do is they used to elect the leaders, and even in many parts of India by this time, there was a lot of changes in the formation of government. That is, people used to elect their leaders. Now, this form of government was slowly changing again. Again, monarchy started prevailing. So, what do you mean by monarchy here? Monarchy means, so monarchy was prevailing. What do you mean by monarchy? Monarchy means it is a form of government where the king will have absolute powers. So monarchy was the prevailing form of government during the Gupta period. If you take republican form of government, there people will have a word in deciding their ruler or head. But in monarchical form of government, the king will be absolute with absolute supreme powers, and he will decide everything for the empire. So during Gupta's period, what kind of government was prevailing? It was monarchical form of government, and the theory of divinity of kings became popular during this period. That means divinity of the kings. That means kings were treated as God. So the kings or the emperors have projected themselves as gods and are semi or representative of gods. So thus they, I mean, thus it reveals that there was a divinity worship of kings also. And the Gupta kings were compared to different gods such as Yama, Varuna, Indra, and Kubera. So you know about these Vedic gods, right? Yama, Varuna, Indra gods. So the Gupta kings were even compared with these kind of Vedic gods. So they were almost the god, I mean, the kings themselves projected as if they were gods or representatives of gods. And who are those gods they got compared with? They're like Yama, Varuna, Indra, and Kubera. They were also compared to Vishnu as regards their function of preserving and protecting the people. As you know that in Vedic gods, Vishnu is the protector or preserver of the entire creation. So same thing, they have compared themselves, or they have relatively, compared themselves as Vishnu. And how they justified that they are like God Vishnu? They said that they are also preserving and protecting the people. Hence, they are also like God Vishnu. And the goddess of Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, appears on many Gupta coins. So they also believed in goddess Lakshmi. So they imprinted her pictures on many coins. This shows that their belief, how they would have turned as monarchs. They are representing themselves as gods, and the powers of gods are also relatively compared. Vishnu, the preserver of creation, they compared it like they are also the preservers of people and protectors of people. And also the wealthy people, and they also even worshipped Lakshmi as goddess of prosperity, as these Gupta rulers are also responsible for their prosperity of people. So like that, no, they have just compared themselves to many gods. That shows their monarchical attitude. That means how absolute powers are kept with them. The Gupta kings enjoyed a large number of powers which covered political and administrative wings. So, in day to day life, there will be political powers, also administrative powers, and Gupta kings kept all powers, such political powers as well as administrative powers, with the emperor only. So, this shows how the administration was centralized. That means all administration decisions will come from only one person, that is emperor. So the Gupta kings not only enjoyed complete powers over administration as well as the other political aspects, but also military wise and judicial fields. Also, they enjoyed absolute powers. Any decision that has to be taken in this judicial, military, political, and even other aspects of the kingdom or the empire, their decision is final. They were the commanders in chief of army. So for entire army, these emperors used to act as commander in chief. And Samudragupta, Chandragupta II, and Skandagupta personally led their armies. So, being projecting themselves as commanders of armies, they have even led their armies in wars. So, who are those Gupta rulers or emperors who have led their armies as commanders of army? Generally, for armies, the king would be separate, and commander would be separate. But now what they have done, they have even considered themselves as commanders in chief of army, and they have led their armies in various wars also. The kings appointed all the governors and important military and civil officers. So, in appointing officers to military and the civil administration, that means regarding people, if any officers are needed to carry out day-to-day activities of people or to help people in day-to-day activities, generally there will be a need of some officers. So that officers, as well as to control the military, they need also some officers help. So all those officers, along with the governors, okay, those days they had the habit of keeping governors to all the kingdoms which they have occupied as in charges. So those governors' appointment and officers under that governors were also decided by the kings. And likewise, the central secretariat. What do you mean by central secretariat? This is the office through which the king or the ministers of king as well as their officers would work. So the central secretariat from where the king's ministers as well as the officers under the ministers would work, they also must be under the supervision of the king. On one hand, they led armies by commander as commanders. On the other hand, they appointed all important officers, military officers, governors, their officers. Everybody was appointed by emperor, and proceeding with the same authoritarian way, they also appointed or central secretariat officers, and this central secretariat also must work under the supervision of the king. So the central secretariat includes all the ministers and their department and as well as their officers, everyone. They all must be under the supervision of the king. The king was the source of all honors and titles. That means if he has to give any if anybody has to be honored in the kingdom, or if he has to be anybody has to be given title, it must be they should take the permission of the king, and he acts as a source of those things. That means from the king itself, the titles and all such things will be generated. All the land in the country was property of the king, so which was a major source of revenue. So all such land in the country, the ownership was with king, and he could also give away the same to anybody he is pleased. And the king has absolute powers to give away the land to whoever he wishes. So that was the kind of authority he was enjoying. He could construct dams for irrigation facility. He could give shelter for foreigners, impose, recover, and remit means cancel any taxes, and also he could also give justice. If any property was unclaimed, that went into the coffers of the king. So, on one hand, irrigation facilities by constructing dams was also done by the king's permission. If any foreigner comes, it is with the king's permission they can take shelter. And in the kingdom or in the empire, if new taxes are to be imposed, or if taxes are to be recovered from people, or if taxes are to be remitted, that means cancelled, or if any justice should be given on any crime or something else, then again it is the duty or it is the supreme decision of the king. Okay, you take any aspects, military, government, administration, giving titles, providing welfare activities to people, shelter to foreigners, and if any property was unclaimed, that means if any property is found and there is no ownership claimed by anyone, then it goes to the coffers of the king. So coffers means it's a like it's a, what do you call, it is like place where the king used to keep all the valuable materials and all. So if if any property is found without any ownership, then all such things will automatically get the ownership of the king. Such was the authoritarian and centralized and supreme powers of the Gupta emperors in those days. So the kings had pompous titles. What do you mean by pompous titles? That means self-praisal and self important, to project their self importance, they used to take themselves some titles like Parameshwara, and they also used to take Maharajadiraja, Paramabhattaraka. So such kind of self-important, that means self-appraisal titles they used to take, like Parameshwara, Maharajadiraja, Paramabhattaraka, and this kind of titles they used to take for themselves only, and that shows how self-important they were. And this also shows that there was existence of lesser princes and chiefs with whom they had to come to terms in managing the empire. So if they call Maharajadiraja, that means the greatest of the kings or the king for the kings. That is the meaning of this title. That means the king of the kings means there are some inferior kings, right? There are some kings who are subordinate to them. So that kind of information also we know about when we study about this kind of titles. So in dealing day-to-day administration, these kings or the emperors, they also have to deal with the inferior officers, or you can call their subordinates, in managing their empire. And despite the divine elements attributed to Gupta kings, the Brahmins, as the chief custodians and interpreters of laws, exercised a check on royal power. So, on the other side, Brahmins were given little more importance in the Gupta Empire. So, the emperor itself was following Brahmanism, right? So, in the beginning, Samudragupta and all, they followed even Brahmanism. That shows how much importance they used to give for Brahmins. So these Brahmins were also not only priestly class, they were also assigned as custodians and interpreter of laws. That means they are the in charges of law and justice department, and also they can interpret the laws. That means they can also try to make their own understanding of their laws. So in terms of only this custodian and interpretation of laws, Brahmins were given little authority, and thus Brahmins were even keeping a check on the royal power. So, if somewhere king tries to give justice, he'll take the advice of a Brahman, and whatever the Brahman says, that they used to listen, because they were the custodians and in charges of the law department. And so they whatever they interpret, that used to be the final generally. Only in this area you can see the Gupta kings having some kind of restriction. So in rest of the areas they were enjoying absolute powers and taking the council of ministers. The Gupta rulers had their councils. Kalidasa, the renowned poet, refers to the Mantri Parishad. So councils were there, like you can consider them like modern states. Okay, and the Gupta rulers had their councils. Kalidasa, the renowned poet, refers to Mantri Parishad. So he says about a group of ministers. The poet in his writings he says about a word called Mantri Parishad. Mantri Parishad means a group of ministers. So this Mantri Parishad consisted of prince, higher officials. So at the top level the prince will be there, then the higher officials of that particular every department will also be in this council of ministers or Mantri Parishad. So the king as well as the prince, sorry, the prince, if we are talking about the Mantri Parishad, where we have a prince and the higher officials, so they are like, and the feudatories were also there in that Mantri Parishad. That means prince, I mean the son of a king and all maybe, and higher officials also you might know that they are the officers working under that ministers. And who are these feudatories? Feudatories are the people who are in charges of land. See, the ownership of land is with the king only. These feudatories are just meant to collect the taxes from these lands. So among the high officers were Kumaramatya and Sandhi Vigrahaka. So we said that there are some officers working under, the king. So among those officers, the highest officers were Kumaramatya and Sandhi Vigrahika. So these are the highest officers in I mean under the king. And the Kumaramatyas formed the chief cadre for recruiting high functionaries. So Kumaramatyas, who are who works under king, they recruit other officers required for the managing the administration of the empire. So Kumaramathyas were the highest recruiting officers, and some of the Kumaramatyas functioned in their own right and maintained their regular office. So that means they also had a kind of independent ruling which they have to report to king, but they can manage whatever they need for the councils, whatever they require for other kingdoms. So all such officers, they can work under Kumaramatya. All the officers in the kingdom, they work under Kumaramatya. It is Kumaramatya who recruits the officers. It is Kumaramatya who just decides on the officers, just consulting the king. And the office of the Sandhi Vigrahika, Minister of Peace and War. So he was referred as a Minister of Peace and War, Sandhi Vigrahika. And this kind of ministry first appeared under Samudragupta, because Harisena, who was a court poet in Samudragupta's time, he was, taking this position, and he was in charge of even war and peace ministry. And the main duty of Sandhi Vigrahika was to deal with the feudatories. That means he has to look after the people who are in charges of. So this Sandh Vigrahika not only controls the Ministry of Peace and War, but also he controls these feudatories. So feudatories are people who are in charge of the land. They are just in charges of the land, not the owners of the land. So ownership of the land is with the kings only. In addition to these officers, there are references to a dozen of other officers engaged in managing military, fiscal means that is economical, and rural matters. So officers were also appointed. Many officers were engaged in day-to-day administration along with Kumaramatya and Sandhi Vigrahika. Other officers were also there. Those officers used to look after military affairs, fiscal means economic aspects of the kingdom, and rural matters about the village and their administration. The growing importance of cavalry is supported by seals and inscriptions. So if you look at the inscriptions and seals, you can see majority of the time cavalry kind of imprints were there. What is cavalry? Cavalry means soldiers who fight using horses in warfield. So you take many coins in Gupta's period, there are also imprints of cavalry. That shows how much importance was given to cavalry in Gupta's time. And civil officials such as Amatyas, Kumaramatyas, etc., performed military functions or were promoted to the rank of high military officers. So, if you look at the military officers, they are like Amatyas and Kumaramatyas. So, these people, they are also the civil officials. That means they look after the problems of civilians in terms of law and order. Like, they serve the army, thus they look after the law and order also. So like Amatyas and Kumar Amatyas, they also perform the military functions. If it is a wartime, then they'll take up the charge of military, and if it is a day-to-day affairs, then they look after like police for the people. And they were also promoted to the rank of high military officers. So this was the system of administration during Gupta's time period. So also if you look into the administrative divisions, there are also officers connected with the land transaction. That is, if somebody has, if there is a land there and there is no ownership on that land, and there will be some kind of transactions going on with the land, the kind of production that happens from the land, all such transactions related to land. So those days already know based on the kind of land they used to collect taxes. So that land transaction, how much it has to be collected from that particular land, all such thing was also looked after by certain officers. Some of these maintained records of land, sales, and other records connected with the land. So, if how much land is present, where it is present, all such records were also maintained by officers. Sales and other records connected with land. So, of course, the king is the owner of the land. Without his permission, nothing can happen. But somewhere, if the land has to be donated to someone, or somewhere the land is sold away by king himself, then what happens is all such records were maintained by certain officers, and revenues might have been collected mostly in kind, but rich peasants probably paid in cash. What do you mean by kind and cash? So most of the revenues that are coming to these kings were by kind. That means whatever they produce, that they offer it as a tax. But the rich peasants, means farmers with more land and more production, they used to pay taxes in form of cash. And the officer connected with the collection of tolls on commodities is known as shaulkika. That means whenever the production has been done, that production has to be carried on road through bridges and other roads, right? The facility of road and bridges is provided by emperor. So for providing such facility, they used to collect toll tax. So that was also an officer called Shaulkika. He used to collect the toll tax in Gupta's period. So trying to understand now the provincial and local administration. So what is this provincial administration? What is this local administration? First, let us see. The Gupta rulers evolved first systematic provincial and local administration, which was primarily concerned with the collection of revenues and maintenance of law and order. That means on what basis they have divided the administrative into provincial units and local administrative units. Provincial and these local administrative units were the units of administration divided by Gupta emperors. What was the basis of division? The division basis was to collect taxes easily and to maintain law and order also in a more effective manner. On these two purposes, they have divided the administrative units into provincial units and local administrative units. There are further divisions in local administration that we will discuss later. First, let us understand what is provincial administration. The core of the empire, directly controlled by Guptas, was divided into bhuktis. So this provincial administration includes provinces. And what are these provinces? These provinces are the places directly controlled by Guptas. That means the Gupta emperor has a direct control on that. For example, if you take Samudragupta, he even conquered southern part and Deccan parts of India, but he never directly annexed them. He allowed the kings to rule themselves, right? So that is indirect control. Here we are talking about provinces, that means places which are under king's control directly. And these provinces were divided into bhuktis. Okay, they were called bhuktis, and each of which was placed under the charge of an uparika. So the provinces were, the, called bhuktis, and these bhuktis were kept as the in charge of this bhukti was uparika, and the uparika was a governor appointed by the king. So these bhuktis were the provinces, and for each bhukti there is an uparika, and this uparika used to act as a governor of that particular province. And who appoints this governor? Again, the king. And the bhuktis were divided into vishayas. So you can compare these vishayas as modern day districts, and these bhuktis as modern day states. So the bhuktis were further divided into Vishayas, and they were kept under the in chargeship of Vishayapati. And Vishaya was again divided into smaller units. However, this kind of bhuktis, bhuktis into Vishayas and Vishayas into smaller units of administration, this kind of or this pattern of administration was seen in the territories directly governed by Gupta kings. So the territories directly governed by Gupta kings has this kind of administrative pattern, that is, on the top level the bhuktis will be present, and next on the top level bhuktis will be present, and later the bhuktis are divided into vishayas, and later these vishayas are further divided into smaller units. And this kind of pattern is seen only in the direct control of Gupta kingdom. So wherever Guptas control the kingdoms directly, there this kind of pattern was observed. And where there was indirect control, there was different fiscal administrative units such as Desha, Mandala, Bhoga. Here, like we have Bhukti, Vishaya, and other units. Elsewhere, that means the places which are not under the direct control, they have Desha, Mandala, and Bhoga, especially in central and western India. So, this central and western India, they are little far away from the Gupta's headquarters. So, they appoint their own, they had a different kind of administrative system there. Those was called Desha, Mandala, and Bhoga. So, this was about the provincial administration. So coming to the village administration. So the village at village level, how the administration was carried. So the head of the village was called village headman, and the Gupta inscriptions refer to the participation of leading local elements in the administration of the village or small towns called vithis. So according to the Gupta inscription, the villages were even considered as small towns as well as some other villages. Okay, it includes some small towns as well as villages. This comes under the village administration, and small towns were called vithis. So what this inscription says is the local people themselves participate in the administration of their village or their small town. So no need for the king to refer there. So kings never used to appoint and all, but the local people themselves, they get permission from their next superiors, and they get appointed as the headmen of the villages. Of course, this information would be known to king, but generally the local people only involved in being the headmen of small towns or the villages. No land transactions could be effected without their consent, and this may have been also true of other important affairs. So here the village headman, he used to look after all the land transactions at village level. So what kind of transactions may happen? Suppose somebody wanted to construct a house in a land, or some wasteland must be turned into agricultural land. All such things, there must be a kind of transaction will go. So a kind of business activity may happen there. All such transactions should go with the consent. Consent means permission of the village headman at village level. Thus, while villages in Mauryan times were managed from above, those in the Gupta times have seemed to be managed from grassroots level. So, in Mauryan period, even villages were monitored by the king and his ministers, whereas in Gupta period it was a little bit decentralized, and the locals were encouraged to manage their own affairs at grassroots level. So, this is about the village administration in Guptas. So if you look at the town administration, so a place which a territory which is comparatively much bigger than a village or small town, how this town administration was carried. There were various towns, and the towns were referred as Janapadas, and they have even power to issue their seals and coins. So you can understand that at village and town level there is a kind of decentralization. That means the powers have been given to them only. So they were administered by a committee of five. So all the Janapadas, each Janapada if you take, it was administered by a committee of five members. And some towns were being administered by some kind of parishads, that means council of ministers. You can call a council. Here a council of five members, and for some other town there might be they calling it as parishad. So with the different names, but a committee kind of things used to administer the towns. Whereas if you look at the village level, there are officers, but there is only one village headman. But here, even in town administration, they were controlling all this through a committees. And the towns in Gupta Empire were usually placed under an officer called Purapala. So see, the Parishad Council or committee will act as a head committee for that towns. But there must be an officer also, right? So that officer who looks after all other officers under the town was called Purapala. The leading local men were also associated with the work of administration in towns. Leading local men. That means, for example, people belonging to the guilds of artisans and traders. Guilds means the merchant associations or artist association. Artisans means a craftsman association. All such associations were there during those days. Guild means an association. So for such associations, heads will be there, and those head people, they will be generally associated with the work of administration in towns. They will be having the privilege of a very dignified and more status men in those towns, and they will also participate in the town administration like Purapalas and all. And Vaishali in Bihar was an important town where there were separate guilds of artisans and merchants. They were called Shrestri and Kulika. So merchant associations were called Shrestri, and artisans association. Artisans means people who are very skillful at by making things with hands. So those associations were called Kulika and Shrestri. So Vaishali, such associations were observed through, and this information is known to us through some inscriptions. So, if you look at the feudal nature of the polity, what do you mean by feudal nature of polity? So, it is a system which is based on the land holding nature or land holding capacity. So, all such things, where there is a land as a major revenue source, that kind of the system to collect revenue from land was called feudalistic system. And the political system in Guptas was mostly feudalistic nature. That means their intention was primarily to collect land revenue and to maintain law and order that we have discussed already. So the revenue based polity was observed in Gupta's empire. If you take the Mauryan Empire, it is credited with comprehensive competence based on centralized control. That means most of the administration was carried on by the central council or central authorities, which were in the headquarters of Mauryan Empire. Whereas those Ganga plains and all, they used to carry that kind of administration, Mauryans. So here also they have carried different kind of administration, right? One patterns have differed. If you look at provinces controlled directly by king, they have one kind of pattern. If they have provinces which are far away from the king's control, they have one kind of administrative pattern. Similarly, in Mauryans also, in the Ganga Plains region, they have a centralized kind of administrative style. That means all things were performed by kings and his king, no, and ministers or officials under him. Whereas in Gupta period, there was a process of devolution on state authority. So the state authority has limited itself to a particular issues, and they were only focusing on those administration. Whereas the functions of collection of taxes, regulation of mines, agriculture, etc., even the maintenance of law and order and defense, earlier these were all performed by state officials. Collection of taxes, regulation of mines, agriculture, maintenance of law and order. If you take at the grassroots level, in Mauryan's time that was under the control of central authority. But by Gupta's time, various officers have been recruited and they were given the duty of all such things. Now, all such this is a kind of decentralized administration you can call. That means power has been transferred to grassroots level. So first it was all kept under priestly class. Later the warrior class was also involved in administration. So this is a kind of feudal nature of polity that historians observed during Gupta's time.